Now, the nervous system, I think you guys are going to find is probably one of the most interesting of the organ systems we study in terms of the information that you're going to learn. And if you think about it, you're using your nervous system. Your nervous system is helping you think. Your nervous system is helping you listen right now. It's actually doing the listening. Not only is it hearing the sounds that are coming out of the speakers, but it's also processing them into information that your brain recognizes because you learned how to talk and you've learned how to understand language. The learning part of listening is also happening in the nervous system. Your ability to react, to speak back, to think, to move your arm, to pick something up, is your nervous system doing its job. And so the nervous system has a lot of really cool functions. One of those functions, so please make sure you underline functions. And I would actually, for your question, right, what are the functions of the nervous system? Because you could say what are functions, but just to clarify, what are the functions of the nervous system would probably be a better question. One thing that the nervous system is able to do is monitor. So it pays attention to things that are external, outside of us, and things that are internal, inside of us. The nervous system is paying attention to the level of sugar floating around your bloodstream. And if you're diabetic, you may be acutely aware of that blood sugar. You may have to pay attention to that blood sugar. It's not that your nervous system isn't able to monitor it. It's that there are cells in your body that are not able to respond to the order to release the insulin to absorb sugar, glucose. But anyway, the nervous system is monitoring that for us. It's also monitoring the external world. It's constantly listening. It's constantly seeing when light's coming in. It's constantly picking up on tastes in the mouth, smells in the sinuses, and any type of sensation of touch on the body. It's monitoring how much light is coming into the body to tell it whether it should stay awake or fall asleep. Our brain gets a signal from nighttime to get tired. It's literally less light going in the eyes, tells the brain to start calming down. And then the nervous system, in different parts, takes all that sensory information and it puts it together into a whole, which we call reality. So it integrates, it brings into like a whole all of that information from the internal world and the external world. It's also responsible for coordinating our responses that are voluntary, ones that we choose to do, like move arm up, move arm down, that's something I chose to do, or involuntary, like make my heart beat faster, breathe faster or slower. My heart rate, although my heart will keep beating on its own, it doesn't need any information for that. My brain, through the nervous system, tells the heart whether to speed up or to go slower. If I'm doing an activity and my body senses, or my brain senses that I need more oxygen to the cells, it will tell the heart to start beating faster so it can get more blood out into those cells with more oxygen out into those cells. Same thing with breathing. It'll increase your breathing rate when you're doing activity because you need more oxygen coming in to burn all of that glucose that you're using for the activity. And then when you're done, it brings it back down to a resting rate. We're actually going to do an activity where we pay attention to the changes of our heart rate, the changes of our breathing rate as we do different activities. But it coordinates all of that. It also coordinates movement. So in order to walk, our nervous system has to coordinate all of the muscles, has to sense where they are, and then it has to know exactly how to move them with just the right amount of pressure so as to lift a leg, to put it down on the ground, to move forward while the other leg is doing a similar motion. All that has to be coordinated. The muscles have to be firing just at the right time, just the right pressure, so you hold yourself up straight. If your hips didn't do it in a coordinated fashion, you would walk in a really ugly kind of wobbled look to it. So the nervous system not only controls all that movement, but it coordinates it so it's nice and smooth. So we can dance if we want to. We can play a sport. We could run. We can run and then kick a ball if we want without falling over and killing ourselves. So that nervous system has a lot of jobs. Monitors, integrates, and coordinates. What is it composed of? Well, it's composed of the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. We'll learn about that next week. Actually, probably the end of next week. And then a bunch of nerves that run from the brain or spinal cord into the body and then back, which we call the peripheral nervous system. This is kind of a hard one to say. Peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. I don't know why there's a bracket there. Central nervous system is usually abbreviated to CNS, brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, we usually denote that as the PNS, and that's all of the spinal nerves that run from our spine out into our body and back, and then the cranial nerves that run out of our brain into our face and then actually down into our organs. We have one large cranial nerve that runs all the way from our brain and attaches to all of our organs. It actually controls your digestion, it controls your heart rate, it controls your breathing rate, it controls how much enzymes get released when you need to digest food. It's a pretty amazing single nerve. And so the nervous system, its basic unit is the nerve. And we call that the neuron. Here's the brain. Here's the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord are known as the CNS, or the central nervous system. All of these neurons that come out of the brain, that come out of the spine, are on the periphery. So we call them the peripheral nervous system, PNS, the cranial nerves, the spinal nerves, and then there's these other little nerves that are in between the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, which we call ganglia. They're like connector nerves. This is a nerve, otherwise known as a neuron. The nerve or neuron, you guys learned a little bit about when we were learning about different types of tissue. This is one type of neuron. It's known as the giant multipolar neuron. And some of these are quite giant. They run from the brain all the way down to these body organs. They run from the spinal cord all the way down to the tip of the finger. They run from the spinal cord all the way down to the toes of the feet. Some of these single neurons can be that long. And they basically have three important parts. Actually, four, excuse me. These little finger-like projections, you can't really see them that well here because they kind of go up and down. So when you make a slice, sometimes you lose them. They're known as the dendrites. The dendrites are attached to the cell body. This is where all the cellular organelles are going to be found, like the nucleus, ribosomes, mitochondria for energy. Then you have a long axon, sometimes multiple axons, can come off of one axon here. And then at the very end, you have these, what we call synaptic terminals or axon terminals. And they actually are what come closest to the muscle that they're trying to control, or the organ cell that they're trying to sense, or the skin receptor that we learned about when we talked about the integumentary system. This is a giant multipolar neuron. Like under a microscope, you can see got long dendrites, lots more you can't see. And then it's got this long tail, which looks like didn't make it in the slice. That would be the axon. Here's the cell body with all the cell structures. There's 3 different types of neurons we find in the body. I never remember this. Let me grab my paper. Oh, yeah, here we go. These multipolar neurons, these are the most common in the body. We find the most of these types of nerve cells. That's what a neuron is. It's a nerve cell. They're found, mostly cranial nerves are multipolar neurons. Spinal nerves are multipolar neurons. They have dendrites, a cell body, long axon, and then these synaptic terminals at the end. We do find some unipolar neurons. These are found in our specific part of our body, which is our sinuses, and they help us smell. They help with the process of smell. They have their cell body in the middle here of the neuron. They do have dendrites, though, connected almost to like a little small axon, connected to another small axon, and then synaptic terminals. And then these very rare bipolar neurons. You have the cell body in the very center of the axon. We find these in the eyes and we find them in the ears, and that's it. So they're very specialized neurons. But they also have dendrites, this axon-like structure, and then the synaptic terminals in the end. And now, what makes the dendrite versus the synaptic terminals important is this is where we receive information. This is where information then goes. So it always goes in that direction, always goes in that direction, always goes in that direction. Well, what is going in that direction? Electricity. Electricity moves through neurons. It's one of the only cells in the body that's able to carry an electric signal, almost like a wire connecting two electronic parts. The electric signal starts in the dendrites, travels through the cell body, goes through the axon, finishes in the synaptic terminals, where chemicals are then released into whatever it's trying to either stimulate or control. And so here's one of those neurons, and then let's write some notes about the cells of the nervous system. Just a few more notes today, guys. The neuron is the basic cell of the nervous system. It has a cell body, which contains one nucleus. It contains some other cellular structures too, but the most important thing I want you to know is this is where the nucleus is. And it only has one nucleus. The nucleus contains DNA, which are the instructions for making more of those cells. If the neuron is told to copy, it will use the information in the nucleus to make a copy of itself. Neurons don't typically make copies of themselves, though. That's what makes it particularly important to be very careful with them in the body. But some can. And then we got the dendrites, which are on the end of the cell body. The dendrites, what I want you to know about them, carry information toward the cell body. That information is in the form of electricity. And we'll talk about how that signal travels through the neuron tomorrow, Tuesday. Now, the axon, which is attached to the cell body, I want you to know carries information away from the cell body. So information comes in, and then it goes that way. It comes in, and then it goes that way. It comes in, and then it goes that way. The synaptic terminals, or axon terminals, or terminal buttons, they go by a lot of different names. They are what communicate with other cells, whether it's a muscle cell, whether it's another nerve, whether it's a gland in the body. This is where the signal then basically stops and then gets converted into a chemical that gets released to keep that signal going into the cell that it innervates. We use the word innervate to describe where or what that neuron is controlling. Some of the axons, many of the axons, that should have been up there, that's weird. Many of the axons are covered in myelin. Myelin is a fatty substance. It basically acts as an insulator to this long axon. And what it does is it allows the electrical signal to travel much faster than it would without the myelin. And so if you have a nerve, a neuron, and I interchange the two words, nerve and neuron, they're the same thing. If you have a neuron that runs from your spinal cord all the way down into the tip of your finger to control this movement here, you want the electrical signal to move fast. Once I think it, I want my finger to move. The faster that moves after I think it, the quicker I can be, the better I can react to my environment, right? So the way that our bodies have evolved is we have these fatty sheaths around some of the axons of some of these neurons, particularly our motor neurons, the ones that control our mobility, our movement. And it allows that electrical signal to travel from the brain to the body part almost as quick as instantaneous. Not quite instantaneous, but almost that fast. Then there are some axons without myelin. Neurons that have myelin, we call them myelinated. Neurons without the myelin are unmyelinated. And you can actually see a diagram here of a neuron. Nerve signal comes in, travels down. If you have a myelin sheath, it can jump from section to section to section to section. And it can make that distance, can traverse that distance really fast. In fact, the nerve signal traveling down an axon that has myelin runs at about 300 to 400 miles per hour, which, thinking about how big the body is, that's pretty fast. A signal traveling down a neuron that does not have myelin, it's about 100 times slower, 3 to 4 miles per hour. So if we had an unmyelinated neuron like this, connecting our brain to the tip of my finger, I would be thinking bend, and it wouldn't bend for a couple seconds. Bend. And it would take a couple seconds for it to bend. Luckily, we have myelin around those neurons. So I think bend, and it bends almost instantly when I do it. And whether it's a unipolar neuron or a bipolar neuron, the signal always travels in that direction. This is that fatty substance, myelin. This is an axon that's been sliced out of probably a spinal cord. And you can see the fatty myelin around it, allowing that signal to travel through that neuron quicker. This here is an axon without it, unmyelinated neuron. Up a little bit closer, here's the myelin. You can see it's just layer upon layer of fat, basically. Fat's a really good insulator of electricity. Fat's a good insulator of a lot of stuff. And then here's an axon sliced open and then looked at under an electron microscope, so you can see even better detail, much closer up. And you can see the myelin here. You can see the inside of the axon with all the minerals and all the liquids that are in there.